A seismic tremor has rocked Europe's industrial heartland. US tariffs, a calculated strike, now threaten the continent's steel behemoth. With Paris hosting emergency talks, anxieties surge. Can Europe forge a united front? Will giants like Germany and France stem the bleeding? As trade winds shift, we dissect the looming crisis. Production plummets, jobs imperiled, and global markets braced for impact. Is this a mere skirmish or the dawn of a steel war? Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The Foreign Policy has reported that Trump's proposed tariffs have caused concern in Europe, with 4 of the 5 proposed measures potentially hitting the bloc hard. EU officials argue that tariffs are bad for business, worse for consumers, and harmful to the global trading system. The tariffs are random, fluctuating depending on the presidential mood, and could impact employment, investment, and exports. Retaliatory tariffs on the US world would be equally bad for Europe, as European manufacturers would face higher input costs. To address this issue, the EU should prioritize completing the single market and forming trade agreements with developing economies. If retaliation isn't an option, EU leaders could look to China for smart retaliation. According to EU News, Trump announced a 25% tariff war against the European Union during the first cabinet meeting of the new administration. Brussels responded by stating that they would react firmly to the tariffs, stating that the EU has been a boon to the US. Trump also complained about the presumed $300 billion trade deficit with the EU, which is inflated compared to the data from the European Commission. The European Commission's Executive Vice President in charge of industry called for the tariffs unjustified obstacles to fair trade. He also promised a firm and immediate reaction to protect European businesses, workers, and consumers from unjustified tariffs. And as the US imposes heavy tariffs on European steel imports, the continent faces a pivotal change. In response, European ministers meet in Paris to discuss solutions for ensuring steel production continuity.
The European steel industry is grappling with unprecedented challenges following the United States' decision to impose heavy tariffs on its steel imports. This move, part of a broader U.S. trade strategy, has caused significant disruption across Europe. In response, French officials have announced that European industry ministers will convene in Paris today to devise strategies aimed at ensuring that continuity of steel production on the continent. The stakes are high, as these tariffs threaten not only steel manufacturers, but also the workers and economies that depend on the sector. Key industrial hubs such as Germany, Italy, and France, which rely heavily on steel exports to the US, are particularly vulnerable. The tariffs jeopardize a crucial pillar of its economies, placing factories at risk of reducing production and increasing costs for industries reliant on steel, including construction, automotive, and infrastructure. Additionally, workers face potential job losses, and the region could experience a broader economic downturn. In response to the crisis, European ministers are exploring alternative solutions, including investments in technological innovation to lower production costs and enhance competitiveness. There is also a growing push for deeper cooperation among European countries to reduce reliance on US markets and establish new global trade partnerships. However, experts remain divided on whether these efforts will be sufficient to counterbalance the economic fallout. This crisis extends beyond the steel sector, impacting global trade dynamics. If the situation deteriorates, global steel markets may face further disruption, and Europe's trade relationships could undergo significant realignment. The extraordinary meeting in Paris could prove pivotal for Europe's future in an increasingly volatile global trade landscape. As the situation evolves, it remains to be seen whether Europe can successfully navigate this crisis and secure its position in the competitive global market.
Providing more analysis about how will European steel production be affected by US tariffs, now we're navigating the turbulent waters of the European steel industry, caught in the crossfire of US tariffs. Joining us from London, Dr. Ahmed Yassine, economic and financial analyst. A very warm welcome, sir. And from Paris, Dr. Majid Boudain, international law professor. Welcome to our both fellow guests and on our program. And we start off with Dr. Yassine. Dr. Yassine, beyond the immediate market shocks, how will these tariffs reshape the very structure of European steel supply chains, and what unseen financial vulnerabilities are now exposed within the Eurozone?
Of course, what American President Donald Trump has done with the tariff, especially with the steel production here in Europe, this is like unprecedented. It hasn't ever been done before. So there's no measures by which the European Union can follow historically. It is something new, entirely new, unprecedented. So only the EU has to cope with the new measures being taken by President Trump. Of course, the implications of such tariffs will be huge, will be immense on the companies who are producing mainly steel here in Europe. Retaliation from the European Union, I can't see any kind of steps to retaliate.
You cannot see, sir?
I can't see.
You can't see, so you have a vision.
Because the Europeans, they trade a lot with the United States, and the balance between the two sides, of course, it is on favor of Europe. So that's why they can't retaliate. They can do very little. Another reason why the Europeans cannot retaliate, because the US cannot. I mean, they don't export a lot. This is the nature of the American economy. That's the parameters of the American economy. It is kind of like self-sufficient within itself. The American economy doesn't rely on export, and that's the main explanation why there is imbalance between trade between US and EU. So all what the Europeans can do is just like wait, because I don't think Donald Trump will be able to carry on for a very long time in this economic dangerous measures, because those tariffs he has imposed on EU, on Mexico, on Canada, especially on the US imports from Mexico and Canada, that definitely will raise inflation within the US. And once inflation has risen to one certain level, But
Okay,
of course,
Dr.
like
Yassin, do I understand from your narrative or what you're saying or your take is that what happened is unprecedented from the side of the United States and that the European Union will not cope with what US President Donald Trump is doing, and it adds to this the tariffs which will cause inflation in the United States. So could you please make me a wider image of the situation, and is the United States going to win out of what it's doing, or is the United States or the European is the losers and they have to do something as a counter defense attack to solve what's going on with what of course US President Donald Trump is doing now?
I mean, what we're having now between the US and EU, economically, we can describe it as a trade war.
It's a
And
trade war.
when it comes to trade war, there is no winners. Like all sides will be losers. And I would expect the US economy to be one of the top losers, because if Donald Trump carries on, implying those tariffs, especially on US import of daily consumer product, what the US importing from Mexico and Canada, that's for sure is going to raise inflation inside the US. And then the Federal Reserve will have no other choice unless to raise interest rate. And
How will
once
the European Union react then, sir? We got that the US will the inflation will increase in the United States and they will have internal problems. What about the European Union? How are they going to fight what's going to take place in the European Union?
They can't fight. They have no tools to fight the US, because the trade between the two parties,
how will
is
they
in
solve
favor.
the situation, sir?
I don't expect Donald Trump to carry on for a very long time, imposing those tariffs, because those tariffs will raise inflation within the US. And then criticism within the US will be very severe against Trump. Only then Trump will surrender and will stop those tariffs. From the European Union, I don't see any kind of tools, any kind of retaliation to be used against Trump measures, because the US doesn't export a lot of products. I mean, mainly some jeans, some clothing, and alcohol product, besides technical kind of products. But all the other economic blocks, they started producing similar technical products, even better and cheaper, especially in China. So I don't think the EU can do any kind of retaliation. Just
Okay,
they
I'll
have
be
to
back
wait
to you
and see.
again, sir. I'll leave you there and I'll ask Dr. Boudin, are the EU's current trade defense mechanisms fundamentally adequate to counter these tariffs, or does this crisis is a necessity to complete the trade policy architecture or their trade policy architecture, sir?
Of course. I mean, the EU has a complete defend itself, and one has to take seriously the decisions of a US president. It's not a technical matter. It's a technical matter here when we see it on the steel tariffs, and they're imposing 25%. It's not an easy thing. When you see that the US is producing around 80 million tons, and all the imports from the world is 20 million, and among this you have 15% is exported by the US, by the EU to the US. The EU exportation is less than the exportation of Canada. It is less than all the exports from Mexico. So it's a small item, but this small item, when you put 25% on it, you have, for instance, on the aluminum, you have around $7.5 billion an increase on the costs. So So the EU exporters, the EU manufacturers will have to pay 7.5 billion. This will be reflected on the prices. So it means there will be less. There is to be a competition which is lower. So
Dr.
it's
Boudin,
really
how do you assess the crisis and how do you assess the situation within the European Union and with the United States?
yes.
How do you read this trade war that's taking place, and for what reason is it taking place?
Yeah, because this is the way it goes now. The EU has to react and will react. And already today they are deciding how they will react, and they will not react only on the steel market or in the aluminium market. They will react on other ways, because what Donald Trump is doing is a multi-dimension attack to reshuffle the whole business between the US and the world, and particularly against Europe. Donald Trump has chosen this time to not attack his opponents, but to attack his allies. And this is a strategy. And this is an economic and a political strategy. So it's a multi-dimension strategy. In this strategy, attacking Europe on the steel is one component. Donald Trump is attacking the EU on steel, on other goods, but also on defense, on the budget of the NATO, on the Ukraine war, and on the metal, all these rare metals in Ukraine and other parts. So it's a whole pattern. And with this whole pattern, Europe is not taking the matter from a single point of steel. They will take it from the whole.
Got you, sir. Sir, I'll ask Dr. Yassin, could this tariff escalation trigger a domino effect, sir, leading to a full-scale trade war? And what are the specific risks for emerging economies, especially those reliant on global commodity flows?
Here,
I'm asking Dr. Yassin. Dr. Yassin, did you hear my question?
Yes, I heard it. The implications on the emerging market and the emerging economies.
Dr. Yassin, I asked you, could this tariff escalation trigger a domino effect, leading to a full-scale trade war, as you mentioned in our first question? And what are the specific risks for emerging economies, especially those reliant on global commodity flows, sir?
Number one, the implications of this trade war definitely will weaken world economy as a whole. Of course, like the other economic blocs will retaliate, like the EU and China, but the retaliation of those economic blocs will be like minimum comparing to the huge steps been taken by Donald Trump imposing such huge tariffs on the US imports from EU, China, and also Mexico and Canada. So, but the main implications, which I really hope these implications will stop Donald Trump and like will put him in his place. This implication will result in raising inflation within the US. And then the Federal Reserve will have no other choice but to increase interest rate. And such measures taken by the Federal Reserve will raise the value of the dollar against like other currencies, especially in the emerging economies. And this is my answer to your question. The main impact on the emerging economies, those measures of like imposing tariffs by Trump will ultimately raise the value of dollar against the currencies in the emerging economies. And this like this point will result in more serve those debts when the dollar has risen in value. It will be a lot more difficult for those economies. So worldwide will be affected. But again, I repeat what I said before. I don't think Donald Trump will be able to carry on for a long time imposing such tariffs. I think
Okay,
he's going to
Dr.
surrender.
Boudin, do you agree with what Dr. Yassin said now?
Well, you see, when you have a huge attack like
Do you
that,
agree first, sir, with what Dr. Yassin said?
well, this is my answer. It's when you're on 2 points. The first point is when you can see, you can forecast that this policy, these politics cannot continue, and at a certain time he will stop. Meanwhile, you will have to suffer a lot of damages, and these damages can be sustainable for a long time. A few months, a year, 2 years, 4 years. You never know. So then it will be irreversible. So this is why all these countries, especially the EU, will resist to that. Because normally you have two ways to renegotiate established practice in business. Either you go to the multilateral forum, which is the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, and then you put your question on the table and you say, okay, dear colleagues, let's discuss. We have a problem with the steel, or we have a problem with aircraft industry, or whatever, and we want to negotiate it. And then you open a session in the World Trade Organization. And then you have the other way is to start with bilateral negotiations. He started with Canada, with Mexico, with now with the EU. But then the way is a negotiation.
He started with everywhere, sir.
Sorry?
He started with all countries.
Yes, but then you will hear Donald Trump has used another method. He puts the law aside, and then he started to try to make a deal without referring to the law. Just a matter of how is the equilibrium of force, of the forces. And this is why he's trying to be pushy, to force people, to force countries to surrender and to accept his deal. And this is now he's using the diplomacy of deals and not the diplomacy in the classical way. But here you have all the countries, especially the EU, they will resist, they will retaliate, and it will go climbing until they reach a settlement, so Donald Trump can change his mind.
Yes, sir, especially when they together they collaborate together, then it's going to be even worse, and the counter defense attack will be even stronger. Dr. Yassin, analyzing Trump's strategy, is this a calculated risk or a fundamental miscalculation? What are the quantitable, sir, indicators of a potential U.S. economy backlash, and how might that feed back into global markets, sir?
Well, I can't call what Donald Trump is doing as the strategy, because what he's doing is against
What do you call it, sir?
international
What
law.
do you call it?
Let me explain. So his measures of raising tariffs.
Dr. Yassin, sorry for interrupting you. You don't call it a strategy. What do you call it?
Well, I call
trade
it
war?
chaos. I call it economic chaos. I call it steps taken by someone who doesn't understand the basics about economics. I mean, at the end of the day, Donald Trump, he is like a trader in the state market. I mean, all what he knows to buy properties and sell properties and manage properties. And because of his wealth, he became president of the United States. And because he tried in his first presidential period to impose tariffs, and that reflected positively in for some sector within the American society. And that's why he was re-elected again. And now in his second term, he became even more dangerous. He became more chaotic. Those tariffs definitely will be reflected in a very, very economic loss for the American economy mainly, because those tariffs at the end of the day will be paid by the American consumer, by the American companies. And here I have to remind everyone, like the parameters and the dimensions of the American economy relies a lot on import. Like American companies and also the American consumer, they have got used on decades to import cheap products from China and from other countries in Southeast Asia. And those products, when they are risen in value by about between 10 to 20% because of Trump tariffs, at the end of the day, the consumer will be paying this gap, this difference. I don't see the Chinese companies will be paying for those tariffs. So at the end, when the consumer feels like his purchasing power has declined because of what Trump is doing, that will result in increasing the inflation within
Dr.
the
Ahmed
American
Yassin,
economy.
I am dearly sorry I'm out of time, and I really wanted to continue discussing this very interesting topic, which is Europe's steel crisis, of course, under the auspices and under the leadership of U.S. administration and U.S. President Donald Trump. That was Dr. Ahmed Yassin, economic and financial analyst, and Dr. Maged Boudain, international law professor. Thank you very much both for your insights and special insights and of course valuable knowledge. And I wish I could say more, from supply chain fractures to transatlantic fissures. The steel crisis exposes deep vulnerabilities. Europe's response will define its industrial future and might reshape global trade landscape. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.